up, everybody, and welcome back to Self-Authored. Today we're going to talk about biology, sexuality, and sex and gender. Well, all the fun stuff today. And as you can see, I'm not that old, so I can't say I'm the most experienced in all of it. But I think we have some fun stuff to learn today, or at least have a discussion about. Basically, we're going to go down the list. We're going to talk about how genders come about, kind of why are there two genders, two sexes anyway, and then the role of gender. Although I will make an argument for why that's bimodally distributed, and we'll talk about what that is. And then we're going to go into, well, how does all this biology manifest itself in behavior and general wants, needs, and directions in life, and then how we could take this as a general guideline and see how it may support you in personal identity and how it supported me in a general way. So to start, the idea is there's two sexes, basically male and female, and they're bimodally distributed. And what I mean by that is, I'll show you a graph right now, is you generally all float to one side or to the other as far as your traits. And where that comes from is in the womb, as all fetuses are female initially, right? So in the womb, you start out as a female, and then based on your genetics, as you begin developing, there's something called prenatal testosterone. So testosterone begins being introduced. And if you're a male baby, you generally start getting quite a bit more testosterone involved. And the funny thing about that is as testosterone begins being introduced, one of the main factors it affects, not only, well, obviously the sex differences, obviously, like genitals, and you start getting muscle mass and things that are different. Even though at a baby, it doesn't really come into play. It's more in your puberty. But at the time, it actually does affect brain development. So your brain begins developing differently based off the prenatal testosterone at the time. In general, which we're going to speak a lot of generalities today because everyone's different. And as I said in the previous video, you kind of got to own your personality and your differences on your own. And you got to develop your identity by figuring out what you got. So we're going to shoot out a bunch of ideas about what you might got and where you fit. So as I said, men generally tend to start developing, their brains start focusing on things, and women on people. And you can see that in how jobs are distributed. There's a lot of male engineers and scientists, and there's a lot of female nurses, caretakers. You see them in the medicine field a lot. There's a lot of that going on. And that's no mistake because the brain actually develops slightly different. Now, one thing that's interesting to note, since this is kind of where you can get in the conversation about transgender individuals as well as homosexual individuals. So it's noted that those who have different prenatal testosterone levels, actually, if it's either lower than maybe normal or higher than normal, you can get those variations, such as maybe a female who is homosexual and attracted to women, or the opposite, a man who's attracted to men. And you can also get the variation of femininity, more feminine male versus a more masculine female. And either way, that kind of works itself out on its own, and everyone's on the spectrum, as you saw on the that distribution scale I showed you. So I'm going to show it again. If you go far one side, you can have extremely masculine males and you can have extremely feminine females. And in the middles, you kind of get the average where most people are going to fall. And then there's that overlap. And my own theory is that since it's essentially, numbers vary, but it's somewhere between 4 to 6% of the population is homosexual. Well, there's that overlap. And where does that fit in for those individuals? And so it's biologically rooted, which is the great thing they made up back in the day to outlaw the idea of when they had the Christian camps where they were trying to convert homosexual people to straight. Well, it is biologically kind of there. So you can't really do that. So either way, your testosterone is going to affect the way you develop. And then to the transgender individuals, since they're like 0.3% of the population, extremely small. Like as anything, when there's a distribution, the ends are going to get varieties way different. And so since we're on the subject, I do feel these individuals are kind of in a new place. And I think what they highlight, since it's kind of a big discussion about it on where do we put these individuals and where do they put themselves and find themselves in society, I think they highlight an issue, which is why I'm making these videos, is that there is a bit of a personal identity, I wouldn't say, maybe a crisis in our country, such that these individuals face it the most. Since there isn't general traditional roles or any easy guidelines to follow, which we'll go across later on this video. Not necessarily that they're easy to follow, but you'll see what I mean. They kind of have to create it all on their own. on who to be, how to be, what to do. And so there's a small percentage of the population that is kind of going it alone. And I would argue that there's not even much help they can do for each other in their conversations, considering their cases are, I'm going to make a guess, that are pretty special, such that they have to figure it out all on their own where they're at. Whereas some of the people who fall into the normal side of the distribution curve, you kind of got some ideas to follow. There's things you're going to align with, and that are going to feel right, and that are going to also work for you. And so you get to figure that's going to be a little easier for you to figure that out. No, that's fine. But I think that the idea is, as we're trying to, over the last probably 40 years, we've been playing with those gender roles on what they mean. And so the idea is, I think there's been a bit more confusion of, well, how fluid should those be? What is the biology on those, and where should we fit on those? And we're going to discuss that. So what that does for your gender is, what I'm saying with all that is, your gender is going to be your tool, as I said in the previous video, your tool to interact with people. And what it does is it gives off signals like your sexuality, what you're into, how should you be interacting with me based off what I'm into or what my likes are going to be. And your gender, how I'm going to define it very loosely, but it's going to be rooted much in your sexuality. And also, it's a courtesy to allow people to politely stereotype you. And I say that because I don't believe stereotyping is necessarily a bad thing, though it has its pathologies. What I mean is, when you look at somebody, you stereotype them no matter what. And why would that be useful? Well, here's an anomalous human being who I know nothing about, and I want to interact with them, or sometimes you have to interact with people. And you got to figure out, well, how should I best go about approaching this person initially until I can learn more information? Well, you stereotype them. And while they give off lots of clues with their behavior, their dress, well, I guess that's really all you're going to run into, right? Mainly behavior and dress. And so then that gives me a general clue on, okay, you're going to be this type of person culturally, this type of person sexually, you're going to like these types of things, you're going to fall into these types of categories. Boom, I have a starting point as to where to interact with you. Awesome. Now, being polite people, what you would do is I would interact, and then if I'm wrong, you would be politely correct me, and we'd have this dance as we figure each other out and interact with each other and try to work together towards whatever goals we're working towards, and individually or jointly. And so if you look at that way, your gender display, as far as how you display it, both in behavior and actions, is essentially a courtesy to others. You're allowing yourself to be somewhat predictable. And now, I don't think it's healthy to wear your gender as all of your identity. I think it should be completely integrated. I think that's where your power and all that is that you're as an integrated individual. Now, discussing that, I believe that your gender roles, as well as what your likes and all that other stuff, this biology that's set at the bottom of it, like I said, men are going to have certain things. They're going to be a little more driven for things. They're also going to be a little more aggressive. Women are going to be a little more loving, but what I mean by that is they're going to be a little more people focused. They're going to be more agreeable with people. They're going to be wanting to help people a lot more. And they're going to be more focused on where men are going to be more competitive. Well, what other functions does that serve? And as a man, through experience, I would say something about men in general is that you are more aggressive. You have more of that biological tendency to be competitive. And there's a lot of use in that. And I think that's why, if you look at an archetype, and what an archetype is, which we're going to discuss a lot here shortly, is an archetype is like a patterned human character. Like in a movie, there's the good guy, bad guy, there's the mom, the dad. Those are archetypes. And so an archetype is a pattern of behavior that manifests after repeated interactions. So we start noticing, it's kind of like, when they'd sift for gold, they'd shake it all up. And so you'd have all the heavy stuff would go one direction and all the light stuff would go another direction. And it would all kind of sort itself out at the repeated interactions between the different particles there, right? Well, archetypes are the same way. And just a general idea before we get into this, there's like the dad, right? There's a good father who's like the good king, so to speak. That's an archetype. Well, then there's the tyrant, the oppressive father who's too hard on his kids and everything like that. And well, that's the tyrant king, right? Those are archetypes. They show up. We see them. And there's always two sides to it, right? And since we're a dimorphic species, there's going to be two sides to the species. And I'll say there's two sides to that side as well. I think the best way to describe that is the Tau symbol, where it has the little swirls of the black and white. So back to the Hulk story. I believe for men, the idea is that the Hulk is the perfect archetype for a man in general. And the reason I believe that is the Hulk is this guy who's got all this uber masculine, he's competitive, he's like, ah, and he tries to attack everything, and he's having trouble controlling his anger and his temper. But at the same time, it's where all his power is at. And so I feel like for men, the goal is same goal as the Hulk. What the Hulk needs to do is figure out how to control his anger, and at the same time use it for all his power. And I think that's why men, if you look at the Tau symbol, we're the side that's all black with a little bit of white in the middle. So we're the side that's complete chaos, which is the idea of, think about it, everybody in puberty, you got men, they go crazy, they beat on each other, they get hyper competitive, and you see it because young men do the stupidest things in the world. We're known for it. And so it's the idea of becoming the mature, sophisticated man is one who's dangerous and has all that capability, but who has such control over it, he's willing to use it. And I think that's where the idea of confidence especially for a man, but for anybody, is your ability to be aggressive sophisticatedly in any situation. So it's your ability either to know you're not going to be aggressed against, or somebody's not going to be aggressive against you, and you're confident, so there's no competition, or you're confident because you can own anybody who's going to say anything in that situation, or any competition, whatever it may be, either when you're trying to get at somebody out in public sexually, or if it's just in discussion and conversation, you can own that conversation aggressively, and no one's going to compete with you, either because your competence or as because of your, if there's no competitors or somebody's going to back you up, so to speak. So there's confidence. But back to the Hulk. As a man, I feel like the idea is evolutionarily, since we're going to talk about evolution here, since we're talking about biology, you go out and your goal was to go face nature, the hunter, right? So the idea is you go out into nature. Nature is the unknown chaos. There's not order there. It's kind of anything can happen anywhere. Snakes could be hiding under any rock. Bears could be anywhere. Either way, you're going out into chaos. I mean, despite common belief, I don't believe you fight chaos with order. I think you turn chaos into order. And you do that by being chaotic against it. The more chaotic force dominates the lesser chaotic force, and so therefore can order it to its will, right? So what's the role of a man? Well, you're this chaotic force that goes out into the chaos, and you create order out of it. It's this old archetypal story of every famous god out there: Zeus, Marduk, Osiris, all of them. That's what they did. Especially Marduk. That was his whole story, as he was a guy who went out and battled the beast of chaos and created an orderly world out of it. Doesn't get much straightforward than that. So how does that manifest itself elsewhere, right? Think about it with young men. Why are young men so attracted to things like the military? Especially go to War of the Worlds, beautiful movie. Tom Cruise, the son, every time they see the battle out there and there's between the aliens and the military, he's drawn to it. And at some point he actually leaves his dad. He says, I have to go. And I think men are drawn to what they see as the frontier of chaos, whether it's scientific discovery, whether it's going to be war, wherever there is conflict, wherever there is things to be found out, wherever there is, like I said, the frontier, wherever the chaos, so to speak, is, men want to be there, and we want to go conquer it and then come back as heroes. And so the reason there's that little white bit inside you is order. So men want to create order out of things. So we're chaotic creatures with the intention of creating order out of the chaos. And so same idea, they say, the alpha male of the group, right? Well, he's the one that keeps the order out of it by knowing he's the most capable, chaotic person. And since this is such a fun subject for me, back to high school. If you think about high school and young kids, especially in their teenagers, most people will know that it's generally seen that women go for the bad boys, right? Well, is it really that they're going for the bad boys, or is it that they're going for the man who seems like he's most capable of chaos? Which is the idea. Why do women like gangsters, right? Especially like the Al Capone types. Because the most top level gangster is always the gentleman who's most composed and also most dangerous. So what do women want? They want sophisticated, dangerous men. And what do men want to be? Sophisticatedly dangerous. And what ends up happening most of the time, especially when you're young, is you're dangerous and kind of chaotic, but you're not very sophisticated. And that's where the maturity in a man, I believe, lies, is in your role to be capable of being aggressive and dangerous and competitive, and you have a control on it. Like the Hulk. Remember when he says, "I'm always angry" at the whole the Avengers movie where they're all together. He says, "I'm always angry." He can take control of that at will, and he even has control of it while he's in that chaotic state. And that's the goal of being a mature man, is stepping into that. Now, what about a woman? Well, the opposite, right? I'm going to classify them as the other side, the other half of that, where it's the white side with a little bit of black in the middle, right? So, and before I go into that, another archetypal stories, think about it when men like to go out. The traditional home back in the day is the idea of the man goes to work and the woman stays home. And when he comes home, they always say, well, the man likes things put in order, right? So to speak. And I'm speaking stories and generalities, right? But there's some truth to these things. And the roles nowadays, especially, is we've seen that they're looser. And as I just described, it's a bit of a spectrum on where you're going to fall out on those gender roles. But I think they're generally going to fall in a direction. And now you may mix those up a bit and each take on various different aspects of those, depending on how you may, how your genetics lay out and how you fill yourself out. But you're going to play into those one way or another, and you're going to pick up different roles on that. And so the women is the other side. Well, you're perceived as this orderly thing that seeks chaos. So, and the reason not necessarily that you're seeking chaos, but you're seeking something capable of it. And so for a woman, it's that idea of women want security. We hear that all the time, right? And then the men pathology will say, oh, they only want a rich guy, right? Well, security, look for it. It shows up all the time. And we know this, people who are generally famous, people who have a lot of dominance in the hierarchy, so to speak, they get a lot of women that throw themselves at them. Not every woman, but statistics show that's where it goes. Well, why? Why would that even be a pattern that would show up? Well, women are going to seek chaos, and they want to dominate. They want to create order out of it. So if men's archetypal story is that of the Hulk, well, the woman's Beauty and the Beast. It's the idea of the sophisticated woman who's trying to sophisticate the monster. And let's go back to kids being young, right? So you got the chaotic bad boy. And what does the girl say she's going to do? I'm going to go, he won't be like that with me. And well, most of it doesn't work out when you're young because the guy doesn't know how to be sophisticated and the woman doesn't really know how to sophisticate a guy. And so it's the idea of the Beauty and the Beast story is the archetypal story of a woman who was first put herself together. Notice in that story, she is very well learned, ordered. She kind of has goals. She knows what she wants. She's figured out. And then she's willing to create something with somebody. And so she goes and finds a monster and creates a sophisticated gentleman out of him. And I think when you get older, hopefully that's already done. You don't have to do much work there. But there is something to this idea of women guide that with a man. They say in the Bible, a woman made man self-conscious. Well, there's some truth to that. Women make men self-conscious. We get worried about ourselves. How should I look? How should I be? Think about young boys when they're like 12 and 13. They stink. They don't try to even comb their hair or do anything. And about the time they hit puberty, and certainly by 15 years old, they're already, I got to worry about my hair and I got to do this. I want to dress this way. And they start being self-conscious about how they are in public. Well, it's this idea that there was a metaphor. A gal told me once, Betty Sproul. She says, if men are the seed in the plant, women are the soil. They're the context that guides the growth of the man. And the old archetype, you see it all the time in old magazines and fantasy stories. There's the woman who's looking as hot as she can look, and she's got this crazy beast, right? It's like either a huge wolf or a bear or some monster or a dragon, and she's like scantily clad next to it, but like she's got control of it. It's hers, right? Same idea in the movie Brotherhood of the Wolf, where at the end it's essentially this woman that's controlling these wild beasts going out and killing everybody. It's the archetype of the woman that is able to guide that chaos and control, and it's that partnership together that's dangerous. It's also the most powerful thing in the world. If two people can get it together and then figure out how to work together in such a manner like that, you're powerful. It's the most powerful thing in the world. And so the idea of two minds are better than one. Well, if you can become one being and totally manifest what you got as a man capable within you as chaos and sophistication, and then the woman that's able to figure that out, how to maintain the order created by the chaotic individual, then good to go. And so that's why I believe women look for stability, and then men they're gonna look for that chaos in a man that's gonna help create more stability. They go out in the world and they create stability, and the woman helps manage it. Now, my disclaimer for all that is that I'm not saying that's law. I'm not saying that's where you have to be. I'm saying most likely you're going to fall into some of that, and you may dabble in the other side of it. So I believe that these archetypes and the way the genetics play out is there's certain patterns of behavior. Now, I also believe if you're homosexual or trans or all that stuff, you're going to fall on that somewhere. And all those things I said, either for men or for women. It's like, consider that, when they say there's masculine energy and feminine energy, it's that type of stuff. You're either going to be more masculine with that type of stuff or more feminine with that stuff, and you're going to be somewhere on that scale. And so Tony Robbins has a cool thing where he says, passion in a relationship, especially connection, is where there's opposite forces on those energies. So if a man's real masculine, he's going to look for a real feminine woman, or vice versa. And I think it's the same way. If you got a really effeminate man, who they end up going for, right? You always see him with a really masculine woman. And so it's the idea you're going to have to match those energies. So whatever you happen to be, wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you are, your sexual preferences or whatever you are on all that, generally, I'm going to make the guess you're probably going to look for a partner that's going to match the opposite side of that. And that's where you'll find it. And so now sexually, I believe this manifests itself sexually too. And you can definitely see that when you look at the extremes of sexual fantasies, right? Starting with men, since it's the more commonly known one. What do men always like in the sexual fantasies? You always see the librarian, the nurse. Let's see, help me out here. What else we got? It's always someone that looks really innocent. And they're usually trying to play off really innocent, but they're dressed sexually. And then the idea is that they're a freak in the bedroom, right? They always say, how's the slogan go? A lady in the street, freak in the bed. Why not, right? Because if a man is the black with a little white in the middle, and he's seeing the woman as the white with a little bit of black in the middle. So what does he want? The completely ordered, put together, innocent thing that has no chaos about it. And then he wants to unleash all that chaos and be the one that he gets access to it, right? So it's like the other metaphor I like using. Well, to every man, his woman is the garden, the old archetype of the Garden of Eden, right? It's the Garden of Eden. And he wants to be the only one that gets to root around in the garden, right? And he wants to find all the chaos and the craziness within the garden and be the thing that tames it. Well, the opposite side, look at the woman. The woman now a bunch of Google engineers, and as they make the joke, well, engineers aren't very socially adept, and of course, so they come up with this study where they find out all the different Google searches, and they find out, well, what are the archetypes that women chase after sexually? And now that since 50 Shades of Grey came out, some of it's not as much of a secret, right? Best-selling book. And a lot of women, they go, I'm not into that. There's a lot of fucking liars out there. That's what's up. But, so they rank the top five. Top one is vampire, and number 2 is werewolf. So that pretty much explains that whole phenomenon with Twilight. That pretty much explains all that, right? And then you got number 3, I believe, was billionaire. Number 4, I think, was surgeon. And number 5 was the funny one, pirate. Well, what do they all have in common? These are creatures or men who are deemed as somewhat untamable, especially the werewolf and the vampire, right? They're kind of out there. They're not even of this world. And then it's the idea of what do the surgeon, the billionaire have? Well, they're high up there on the dominance hierarchy, especially be a billionaire, right? But generally the idea is what those people say they do. And the surgeons, there's always kind of a creepiness to surgeon, right? I mean, they're dealing with cutting into bodies and stuff like that. So it's the idea of there's unknown to them. They're mysterious, and generally they're going to be kind of controlling these forces. And then she gets to be the one that controls that. And she gets to be the one that has some play into that. And essentially, it's the idea that women like to be able to go in and know that they told a man what to do, and that they have that power of playing with that, right? Like, I wielded chaos for a little bit. And obviously they don't like it all the time, right? Because that's the whole problem of the guy that's too nice. You got the guy that's too nice. Well, the women don't like that. They don't like it when he does everything she tells them to do. Well, shit, that's boring. That's no fun. And since we like causing problems in our life, we got to deal with shit like that, right? So you want a little bit of chaos. You want somebody who's going to push back a bit. And so this is somewhat some things I found online, as well as my discoveries of own experience. And I feel like there's some truth to these ideas of the archetypes of gender roles and the way we play out sexually and what we're into. And since we're on the topic, and so basically to wrap that part up, there's truth to that. And it's not that I know I use a lot of times, well, this is what men want, this is what women want. You might be a little more feminine man or a masculine woman, and you might be on the other side of that. That's the whole idea of the woman who goes out and takes on career and owns the world and everything like that, and to say, well, that's the masculine role. And the whole idea of feminism is to say that, well, there are some women who are going to want to take on that masculine role, and that's okay. And that's fine. What I'm arguing is based on that distribution. That's not everybody. Most people are going to fall into a certain category with variation, but you're going to be towards the middle mostly. And there's going to be some of us that are on the extremes, and you're probably more obvious when you're on the extremes, right? Where you're at. It's not going to be as much of a secret. And sometimes you're in the middle. You got to figure that out on your own. But I hope to share all this with you guys, that you can take some of this and maybe it'll make sense of some of your past experiences, make sense of where you're at now, and maybe make a lot of sense of some people that are around you. And you guys can help make sense of your personal identity on kind of who you are, what you're into, what you're looking for, and why. And that'll help you out. And so bringing that back around on sexuality, I think now this one is one of those ones that's kind of like, it's always weird to explain. I think mainly, especially in America, we were founded by Puritans, generally forgotten about. And so the idea of Puritans, super sexually repressed, we're kind of still like that today, right? The whole idea of, there's no showers in gym class anymore. People that probably don't even shower nude much in the gym or even change in the gym like that. There's a lot of seclusion about that. And I'm not saying you need to go out and be able to express yourself completely nude, but owning your sexuality seems to be such a huge part of life and it's not just owning whether, oh, I'm straight or I'm gay or I'm this, although you could tell how important it is, because the moment you can see, especially with homosexual individuals who don't, before they come out, there's generally their level of happiness and sometimes even their weight. You got somebody will come out and then it's like a weight's been lifted off of them. Literally, they're happy, they'll start losing weight, they start getting fit. There's a lot of other things that come with that when you own your sexuality, because you own it in your gender expression, and you become very happy with how you express yourself with. And obviously, now that you feel like you're authentically being part of yourself in the world as a tool working with others, then there's no longer deception in the way you're participating with others. And I feel it's the same for straight individuals too. It's owning your sexuality as either a confident sexual man or a confident sexual woman. And that could show up a whole bunch of different ways. There's the scale between prude and, well, I guess it's on your side, prude and, absolutely promiscuous, and where you're at on that. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong about it, but I do believe you have to own where you're at. If you're going to be a prude, you own that, the good and the bad that comes with it, and the way you manifest yourself in the world, and the way you dress, and the way you express yourself in your gender. Same thing if you're hyper promiscuous. You own that, and you get to own it powerfully. And what I mean by that is, if you're a promiscuous individual and you get feedback from other people about the way you are or the way you're handling it, then you got to deal with that. Part of your gender expression as a tool and the way you express yourself, and like I said, your gender is partially, if not mostly, expressing your sexuality, is you need to own what comes with that. And it's the tool you participate with other people in the world. And if it's not working for you, well, then fucking modify it, change it the way it works. And you can change that. And it's so, if you're insecure about yourself sexually, you got to work through that, figure out what's going on. And so that way you can express yourself confidently with others, especially with the other sex, and you can, even with the same sex, and you can, and such. I don't know. This is one of those topics I feel like, help me out. You guys, this is a discussion based on everything I've said through either, do homosexual individuals and transsexual individuals fall in those same archetypes? And especially if you're one of those individuals, I'd love to interview you and talk about that and see where you feel you fit on that scale. Sexuality. I think we all can agree it's something you got to own as part of your identity and really integrate it as part of yourself. How does that play out? That one, especially, I think, in these days, is one that's kind of harder to fit in. I think that was part of the 60s with the whole sexual freedom. That experiment got played out, and then it got integrated to some degree into our society. And there's the hookup culture, and then there's the people who are more traditional and got the whole prudish thing. And then there's the hardcore prudish thing is like, you don't have sex till marriage, right? And then the individual, the in between is going to be some variant thereof, right? I think they say the average number of sexual partners is 6 or something like that in the world or in the United States right now. So what do you guys feel is on sexuality? You know, what is it to integrate your sexuality as part of your personal identity? I feel like that one's a little bit more difficult discussion. Does it really have to do with just your archetypes, or where do you feel it sits? Let me know in the comments below. And then for now, as far as the biology of your sex, gender, and sexuality, that's all I got. I mean, we can go a little deeper into the actual biological aspects of it, of cells and hormonal stuff like that. But as far as how it manifests in behavior, I think the archetypes do a good job of describing that. And I hope that helped you guys out as far as with yourselves and with those you talk with. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw here today, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of what I got going on, subscribe. Next week, I'm going to be talking the next half of biology, which is going to be your race, history, and the culture that comes along with that, and some of the biological aspects that come along with race. It'll be a fun one. So join me next week, and I'll see you guys next time.